Weishaupt never repatriated with the Jesuits. There's a lie of many conspirators of history which is controlled by the Pope. They want to create this academy between the Illuminati and the Jesuits, never fall forth. Weishaupt was operating under orders with superiority. At the time was a general, then later another superior. Weishaupt then heiresed to reliance with the House of Rothschild. So now we see the Rothschilds, the Jewish Rothschilds, Rothschild, become the bankers for the Jesuit orders. During the upheaval, we will know as the French Revolution is pulling off the wars. So this alliance between the Jesuits and the House of Rothschild is highly Masonic Jew. It's very important to realize at this point because we have to live with it, endure of today. Also Bavaria is the strong Homo Jesuits. He was a used inquisitional torture chamber during Nuremberg, interested that the Nuremberg trials with the Nazis will be held out. And the very principles of the Illuminati, the way the organization was run, is the very principles of the Jesuit orders. That's found in Nestor Webster's book called The Secret Society. In 1814, Franz Rothschild de Berkheim reported on Germany's secret society and stated, "The oldest and most dangerous association is that which is generally known under the denomination of the Illumines, and of which the foundation goes back to the middle of the last century." Bavaria was its cradle. It is said that it had pro-founders several chiefs of the order of the Jesuits. Through the Illuminati, the Jesuits sought to take over various powerful secret societies, especially the higher degrees of Freemasonry. If you study all different organizations in the world, whether it be the Knights of Malta, the Bilderbergers, the Club of Rome, the Council of Foreign Relations, as you study all these different groups and the Knights of Malta be included, that you will find they are like a buffer behind which the Jesuit order operates. In his book, Proofs of the Conspiracy, John T. Robinson were concerning the Masonic lodges. At this time, 1798, the Jesuits interfered considerably, insinuating themselves into the lodges. Robinson went on to say, "This society is well known to have put on every shape and to have made use of every means that could promote the power and influence of the order. And we know that at this time they were by no means without hope if we were establishing this dominion of the Church of Rome in England." And with the Illuminati and the high orders of the Freemasonry, the Jesuits fomented the destruction of the very monarchs who opposed them, beginning with the French Revolution and later with Napoleon Bonaparte. The French Revolution was launched in waves by the Jesuits using Grand Orient Freemason and Scottish Rite Freemasonry anyway, for the purpose of punishing the Roman Catholic monarchs in Europe, taking back the Vatican Empire from the Pope, tearing away the colonies from England, Protestant England. They were doing several things in one time. The Jesuits of the Great Magallans, they can take along 10, 20, 50 different lines at the same time and coordinate them all together. So to understand what we do, we have to think to unlock the clinic and everything finally. So the purpose of this French Revolution, first and foremost, was to punish the Roman Catholic monarchs in Europe. With that they do. What happened? Why they beheaded Louis XVI, the grandson of Louis XV? "We're gonna teach you, Bourbons of France, you mess with us when you suppress the Jesuits, and then we're gonna behead his wife, Marie Antoinette. She was the daughter of Maria Theresa. She was a Habsburg, so we're gonna punish you, Habsburg. You suppress us, we're gonna cut off the head of Marie Antoinette using our Jacobins. And then you Braganzas of Portugal, we're gonna drive you in exile by using Napoleon." They did. They go to South America. "And you Bourbon of Spain, we're gonna drive you in exile too." We have Napoleon set up Little Banana Republic of Spain. And in the Knights of Malta, how do you keep us out of Malta in 1760? "We're gonna teach you a lesson." So they took Napoleon down here when the huge fleet took all the treasures of the knights of Malta, took all their weapons that they can use that in the invasion of Egypt, in which time the Jesuits used Napoleon to kill all the Mamelukes, the bodyguards of the caliphs of Egypt. So now they are waging war against Islam, like we are today. When Napoleon's usefulness came to an end, the Jesuits had him betray the soldiers in a war with Russia. Like many of the founding fathers of America, the French soldiers were very nationalistic, and they would be a problem in the future plans of the Jesuits. After he defeated Russia, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. Working in the shadows, the Jesuits make sure he was kept in reserve should he be needed. So Napoleon was sent to the island of Elba and given annual pension of 2 million francs. Then, on August 7, 1814, the unthinkable occurred. Pope Pius VII restored the Jesuit order. The Jesuits revived in 1814 with the papal bull what Pius VII, which brought them back into existence. The suppression of the Jesuits was to last forever. It only lasted 41 years. Former U.S. President John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1816 about the rebirth of the Jesuits and the danger they posed to America. Adams stated plainly, "I do not like the resurrection of the Jesuits. They have generals now in Russia, in correspondence with the Jesuits in the United States, who are more numerous than anybody knows. Shall we not have swarms of them here, in as many disguises as only a king of gypsies can assume, just as painters, publishers, writers, and schoolmasters? I have lately read Pascal's letters over again, and 4 volumes of the history of the Jesuits. If ever any congregation of men could merit eternal perdition on earth and in hell, it is the company of Loyola." Jefferson replied back to Adams, "Like you, I disapprove the restoration of the Jesuits, for it means a step backward from light into darkness." Coincidentally, the restoration of the order occurred 1 month before the first meeting of the Congress of Vienna in 1814. The Jesuits were deeply involved in this meeting. When the monarchs of Europe began fighting among themselves, the Jesuits manipulated the circumstances to bring Napoleon back for an encore performance. The famous 100 days. The monarchs gathered in Vienna, king to turns quickly in order to beat their known threat. The Jesuits' careful manipulation of the events being played out like a chess game. Again, it must be remembered that the Society of Jesus never wanted to do away with kings. The Jesuits only wanted to punish those who had suppressed the order. In March of 1815, 9 days after the Congress of Vienna ended, Napoleon led his patriotic monarchy heading men to defeat by attacking the wrong spot of the British lines at Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo was deliberately lost by Napoleon, as explicated by our great Southern General Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. When you review the battlefield, you can find this in Dabdew's greater work with his son biography, as he wrote on Stonewall Jackson called The Life and Times of Stonewall Jackson. He said Napoleon attacked from the wrong position. He would attack over here, and exactly what happened. Napoleon deliberately sacrificed his army in Waterloo so that there will be the least amount of troop of patriots in France to resist the return of King Louis XVIII into France. We immediately restored the Jesuits and restored the Inquisition. Having no further need of Napoleon, the Jesuits made sure he was sent far away to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. While there, he was poisoned and died in 1821. In his memoirs, Napoleon maintained his loyalty to the Catholic Church, but had this to say about the Jesuits. The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is a general of an army and not a mere father abbot of the monastery. An aim of this organization is power. Power in its most despotic exercise, absolute power, universal power, power to control the world by the volition of a single man. We have stated that the Jesuits were deeply involved in the Congress of Vienna. Extensively, these meetings of the monarchs of Europe under the direction of the Jesuits was for the purpose of reorganizing Europe, restoring the balance of power, and discussing the creation of Federation of Europe according to author Bert Bacardi. The Congress of Vienna and several other secret meetings were in reality black conspiracy against popular governments. After the Constitution was signed, Protestant principles were put in place in the United States. We go into early 1800s. The Napoleonic Wars were being fought in Europe, in Russia, but finally the Napoleonic Wars have been stopped. All of these monarchs of Europe convened in Vienna, Austria. The man who headed it was Clemens von Metternich of Austria. Russia was there, England was there, France was there. They all came there to Vienna to decide on a big problem in the world. There were governments of the people, by the people, and for the people that will bring established. And these monarchs of Europe and the Pope himself, Pope Pius VII, and the newly formed re-established Jesuits order in 1814, they all came together and they said, if we don't destroy this free popular government, eventually the principles of those governments will destroy us. So the Congress of Vienna, it was voted that they would pursue the destruction of any free government in this world. And in 1814, the one government that was the thorn in their side was the United States of America. 8 years after the Congress of Vienna, the same parties met in Verona, Italy, for the second meeting to discuss the United States of America and the threat of popular government. For posterity's sake, on April 25, 1916, Senator Robert L. Owen of the United States Congress entered into the congressional record the secret Treaty of Verona that was signed by the monarchs of Europe. These kings of Europe, under the control of the Pope, called themselves the Holy Alliance. The first article stated, the high contracting powers engaged mutually in the most solemn manner to use all their efforts to put an end to this system of representative governments. The third article gives special thanks to the Pope for what he has already done for them and solicit his constant cooperation in their views of submitting the nations. Now, the Treaty of Verona was an agreement between the Catholic monarchs of Europe and the Vatican to destroy the concept of representative government worldwide. Samuel B. Moore shows conclusively that Metternich and the Jesuit order and Pope Pius VII, that they all agreed that the way they would destroy the United States would be by sending as many Catholic immigrants to the American shores that they possibly could. So thousands and thousands of Catholics were sent to the United States. Thousands and thousands of Catholic priests and many Jesuit coadjutors were sent to America to take over and destroy the government. The treaty was signed on November 22, 1822 in Verona, Italy by Metternich of Austria, Chateaubriand of France, Bernstein of Prussia, and Nelson Roth of Russia. After reading the secret treaty, Senator Owens pointed out that the threat under the secret Treaty of Verona to suppress popular governments in the American Republic is the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. This secret treaty sets forth clearly the conflict between monarchical government and popular government and the government of the few as against the government of the many. Because of the Congresses set Vienna and Verona in 1814 and 1822, there was an English statesman who is at both of those meetings. His name was Lord George Canning. And in the Bert McCarthy's book called The Suppressed Truth about the Assassination of Lincoln, it says in there that George Canning warned the United States government as to what was going on. Canning was in contact with a man by the name of John Quincy Adams, who was a congressman of that times. He wrote to Adams, he said, "The monarchs of Europe, the Pope, and the Jesuits are planning to destroy America." Quincy Adams took the information to the president of that time, of the man by the name of James Monroe. We know him as James Monroe. James Monroe took the information, wrote to a former president who is still alive on that time. The man's name was Thomas Jefferson, who is in retirement at Monticello. Jefferson wrote back to Monroe and he said, "This is the greatest affront to America since the Revolution." He said, "We need to do everything we can to oppose and stop this holy alliance set up by the monarchs of Europe, the Pope, and the Jesuit order." In his letter to Monroe in 1823, Jefferson said he did not want to pass up an opportunity of declaring our protest against the atrocious violations of the rights of the nations by the interference of anyone in the internal affairs of another, self-legitimately began by Bonaparte and now continued by the equally lawless alliance calling itself holy. America's response to these two congresses was James Monroe's State of the Union address called the Monroe Doctrine, where he told the powers of Europe, he said, "You stay over there, you fight your wars in Europe, we will stay over here. If you ever colonize in the Western Hemisphere, we will consider it an act of war." That was the Monroe Doctrine. But in our history books today, we read nothing of the role of the Pope and the Jesuit order to destroy America. Nothing is in our books today to that effect. But that's why the Monroe Doctrine was written. The Jesuits convened a meeting in Chieri, Italy in 1825 to discuss tactics for dealing with the Protestant nations. Unknown to the 13 Jesuits gathered for this clandestine meeting, a young novice named Leone was in the adjoining library. Leone could not believe his ears and began to take notes of what was being said for posterity. An English translation appeared in 1848. What Leone heard was no less than Jesuit plan for world domination and the destruction of heretics, especially the heretics in Protestant America. As to the Jesuit plan for world government, you will know that what we aim at is the empire of the world. As to their plan for working in secret, let us prepare a secret war which, though less brilliant, is more sure to bring us the advantage. Let us shun too much light as to the Pope, also known as the Vicar of Christ. We may say that God designs for exterminations like the Canaanites all the nations that obstinately refuse to enter into the unity of the Church, and that the Vicar of Jesus Christ is appointed to execute this judgment in due time. As to Protestant and non-Roman Catholics who do not join Rome, we have, however, one source of rejoicing. We cherish at the bottom of our hearts this principle that whatever does not unite with us must be annihilated. That Protestantism must therefore be utterly abolished. As to the Bible, then the Bible, that serpent which would have erect an ice-flashing fire threatens us with his venom, was the trail along the ground, shall be changed again into a rod. As soon as we are able to seize it, and what wounds we will not inflict with it upon these hardened pharaohs and their cunning magicians. The Monroe Doctrine was ratified in 1823. The Jesuit meeting in Chiari, Italy took place in 1825. 1 year later, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day. Both of these former presidents and defender of the Constitution died on July 4, 1826. What are the odds that these two men, so critical to the birth of the United States and enemies of Holy Alliance, the Vatican and the Jesuits, would die on the same day? The day they died was the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Autopsies were not performed on the former presidents, and it was assumed that they died of natural causes. Another strange coincidence would be the death of James Monroe on yet another 4th of July in 1831. Monroe left office in 1825 and supposedly died of tuberculosis 6 years later. It should be noted that the symptoms associated with the arsenic poisoning, difficulty in breathing, dryness and tightness of the throat, seizure, and burning pain are similar to those of tuberculosis. George Morgan commented on the strange circumstances in his book, The Life of James Monroe. Morgan states, as John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had died at the fort 5 years before, Monroe's death added to the wonder, as though a power aloft had taken cognizance of the peculiar patriotism of this mortal man and had translated them. Is it possible that the power aloft was not from heaven and was not benign? Perhaps this power was not looking at the nationalism and patriotism of this man with joy as much as with a vengeful eye, as the Jesuit oath clearly states. A Jesuit vows to make and wage relentless war secretly or openly against all heretics, Protestants and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulation cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaded bullet. Others have even pointed out George Washington's sudden death in 1799 as very suspicious. There is evidence that the Jesuits, as few American presidents before the world to the States, the first president that assassinated was George Washington. He was poisoned by anthrax. One of his 3 attending physicians was behind that poisoning. Remember, from the day he got sick to the day he died was a mere 2.5 days. According to Headley's Green Work of Life of Washington, so he was murdered. There is evidence that the Jesuits, as few American presidents before the world to the States, the first president that assassinated was George Washington. He was poisoned by anthrax. One of his 3 attending physicians was behind that poisoning. Remember, from the day he got sick to the day he died was a mere 2.5 days. According to Headley's Green Work of Life of Washington, so he was murdered. Why would the Jesuit want to kill George Washington? Like Jefferson, Adams, and Monroe, Washington was first and foremost an nationalist and war against foreign influence. He promoted the policy of neutrality and the avoidance of European alliances. Washington repeated his isolationist policy in his farewell address that was published in newspapers throughout the country. Washington wrote, "It is our policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." Besides this admonition to avoid foreign alliances, Washington loudly declared America should keep itself free from foreign influence. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe, me fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people are to be constantly awake. In addition to these publicly expressed opinions, Washington had acted swiftly to put down the Jacobins-inspired risky rebellion in 1793 with 15,000 troops. Instigating the rebellion was the French ambassador Edmond Guinet and the revolutionary democratic clubs that sprung up in America. Guinet and the democratic clubs will link to the Jacobins Club in France. In her book, World Revolution, Nestor Webster states, "This Jacobins Club were organized by the Revolutionary Committee under the direct inspiration of the Bavarian Illuminati." The Jesuits created the Illuminati and were thus working through the democratic clubs in America. Washington never realized he was taking on the Jesuits when he crushed the Whiskey Rebellion. John Adams became president after Washington left the office. During John Adams' administration, war with Illuminati-controlled France was a verdict, but Washington made it known he would not resist a call from Congress to assume command of the army. Furthermore, Washington endorsed the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts that were designed to protect the United States from the extensive French Jacobins conspiracy. It is therefore no wonder that the vengeful eye of the Jesuits was focused on George Washington. After leaving office in 1797, Washington lived only 2 years and 9 months. From the onset of his illness in 1799 to his death was a mere 2 days. As with Monroe's death, the symptoms leading up to Washington's death were difficulty in breathing, tightness of throat, and burning pain. Washington was only 67 years old when he died. Like Jefferson, Adams, and Monroe, there was no autopsy with Washington's death. However, the Jesuits made sure that they have a servant on hand to Tobias Lear to carefully plan the story that Washington had neglected to take off his wet clothes after coming home from his day off riding about his farms in snowy weather. Washington had taken cold undoubtedly from being so much exposed the day before and complained of his sore throat. Lear said this even though Washington explicitly told him that his greatcoat had kept him dry. According to Lear, we are to believe that George Washington, who survived the hardship of the winter at Valley Forge and other severe winter, did not know how to take care of himself in bad weather. The more likely truth is that Washington had opposed the plans and schemes of the Society of Jesus and was assassinated for his interference. Other American presidents, both in the 19th and the 20th century, who would run afoul of the Jesuit order would meet untimely deaths. For instance, the short presidency of William Henry Harrison. Harrison had been elected president on March 4, 1841. He would serve as president for only 35 days. At the end of March, the newly elected president came down suddenly with an illness and died. Many thought this was the result of his long inaugural address, which lasted over 2 hours in cold weather. But Harrison had been fine after the speech, and weeks had passed since the inauguration. Why was Harrison assassinated, when only has to go to his inauguration address to find the main reason? Harrison stated on the 4th paragraph of his speech, "We admit of no government by divine right, believing that so far as power is concerned, the beneficent Creator has made no distinction amongst men, that all are upon an equality, and that the only legitimate right to govern is an express grant of power from the governed." Like other leaders in the past, Harrison was thumbing his nose against the Holy Alliance, who practiced the divine right of kings to wield power as sanctions by the Pope. Harrison has also unwilling to accept Texas as slave territory into the Union, which ran against the Jesuit plan abusing the slave issue to agitate and divide the northern states from the southern states. Unlike Adams, Jefferson, and Monroe, the Jesuits did not wait for the 4th of July to eliminate the heretical President Harrison. Harrison was poisoned at the end of March and died on April 4, 1841. Vice President John Tyler succeeded Harrison as president. The annexation of Texas was accomplished in 1845 under the watchful eye of the new president. Another president who died suddenly in office was Zachary Taylor. Taylor was elected president in 1848. Taylor was a Southern slaveholder who did not want slavery extended to any more areas of the country. Like Washington, Taylor was devoted to the Union of the American States, was very popular, and was a military man. Another crisis over slavery occurred by the Jesuits in 1850. A compromise was being pushed to avert a split in the Union. Taylor did not like the compromise being worked out in Congress. On July 4, 1850, Taylor attended the groundbreaking ceremonies for the Washington Monument. He was fined upon returning back to the presidential mansion. Then he became ill after eating some raw fruit that some say was a bowl of cherries. A violent fever came upon him. Senator Bell commented that the violent attack commencing soon after his return to the presidential mansion, old rough and ready, frustrated his assassins and managed to fight the poison for 5 days and avoided the 4th of July curse. President Taylor died on July 9. The Jesuits removed a strong unifying leader and replaced him with a more malleable president in Millard Fillmore. Fillmore signed a compromise in 1850, just 2 months after Taylor's death. As the Jesuits' agitation of the American states was reaching its climax in the 1850s, a trial occurred in 1855 at a courthouse in Illinois that will bring two faithful men together. These two men would join forces to fight the Jesuits. The first was a rebellious Roman Catholic priest by the name of Charles Chiniquy. The second was a lawyer by the name of Abraham Lincoln. Charles Chiniquy did not approve of the corrupt conduct of many of the priests he knew. These evil priests were drunkards, sexually promiscuous, and thieves, often stealing money and properties collected from their parishioners. The priesthood in Chicago was very corrupt, morally, and they were drinking heavily, and they were going these retreats and take up a collection between themselves, put it all in the pot, and go out and buy a lot of booze, and also they rent a lot of hookers. Apparently, there's a lot of sexual events going on that time, and it was wrong, and he did not like that, or he tried to change it. He quoted exclusively from the Bible, and his bishop just could not tolerate that. The heads of the Roman Church wanted Chiniquy to ignore these illicit and illegal activities. When he did not, Bishop Reagan of Chicago and another priest by the name of Lavelle arranged to have Chiniquy accused of rape. Chiniquy needed a good attorney. An attorney by the name of Abraham Lincoln was suggested. Abraham Lincoln had a team of it's just a regular defense team. Lincoln being one lawyer, a gentleman by the name Stephen R. Moore was another lawyer, and that was a big court case at that time. It was the most important court case that Lincoln ever had in his entire legal career, as a matter of fact, but it's been buried by the Illinois government. The trial did not go well for Chiniquy. The general feeling was that he would be convicted. Local newspapers by that time, they speculated that Chiniquy was going to be found guilty, and that was being broadcast throughout the entire Catholic community at that time. Fortunately for Chiniquy, a witness came forward for the defense. Her name was Philomene Shores. Miss Shores had been in Father Lavelle's house the day the plot to freeing Chiniquy had been concocted. Shores contacted Lincoln and agreed to testify. She caught the night train to Urbana and met up Sir Abraham Lincoln and explained to him exactly what happened. Once Bishop Reagan and Father Lavelle found out about the potential witness, they fled the city. The prosecution dropped the charges and Chiniquy was vindicated. As they left the courtroom, Charles Chiniquy was in tears. Lincoln says to him, "Why are you crying, Mr. Chiniquy?" says, "Your agent said, and your enemy fled, and you're free to go." And he said, "I'm not crying for myself, Mr. Lincoln. I'm crying for you." He said, "Because I saw no less than 11 Jesuits with the sentence of death on their face today on this courtroom, and know for surety they will kill you for what you have done." Lincoln says, well, let this be my death warning. And he gives me, Chiniki will bill for me for $50. And then Lincoln Silver happens, city matters. Now where man must die, but Teddy must die to post on duty, Your Honor. Chiniqui's words of warning to Lincoln were proved to be true. The conspiratorial head of the Jesuits at work, the conspiracy to further their goal of a world under papal control.